My name is David, and I always thought I had the perfect life. I had a good job, a beautiful wife named Laura, and we lived in a cozy house on the outskirts of Boston. But recently, something felt off. Laura had become distant, more secretive with her phone, and often worked late, which was unlike her. One evening, as I was putting away the dishes, I noticed her phone light up with a message. It was from her boss, Mark. The message read, "Can't wait for our Thai adventure." My heart sank. Thailand? We hadn't discussed any trips together. I tried to brush it off as a work thing, but the words kept echoing in my mind. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't sleep. I watched Laura as she slept, her face peaceful, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. The next morning, I decided to find out more. I started by checking her emails and found nothing unusual at first. But then, I discovered a separate email account under a name I didn't recognize. Inside, there were dozens of messages between her and Mark, planning not just a work trip but a romantic getaway to Thailand. The betrayal stung like 1,000 bees. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Here I was, believing in our love, while she was planning to leave with another man. But I knew I couldn't let this slide. I was not just going to accept this. I was going to confront it head-on. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. The days that followed were like living in a fog. I went through the motions at work, but my mind was elsewhere, piecing together the puzzle of my crumbling marriage. I decided to dig deeper. I started observing Laura more closely, noting her every move. She was careful, but not careful enough. One afternoon, while she was in the shower, I managed to access her phone. There were photos, selfies of her with Mark, smiling in ways she hadn't smiled with me in months, and tickets to Thailand, scheduled for just 2 weeks from now. The shock was paralyzing. I had to grip the kitchen counter to steady myself. My initial reaction was to confront her right then, but something inside urged me to wait. I needed to understand the full extent of this betrayal before I acted. I began to document everything. Emails, photos, messages. I stored them all. I even set up a small, hidden camera in our living room, disguised as a smoke detector, to catch any further evidence. That evening, Laura was more cheerful than usual, chatting about mundane things like the weather and a new recipe she wanted to try. Her voice sounded distant, like it was coming from another world. I played along, nodding and smiling, but inside, I was planning my next move. I knew I had to gather more proof. If I was going to confront her, I needed to be undeniable in my accusations. But more than that, I needed to ensure that this affair would not just end, but that it would end with Mark out of our lives for good. Revenge was not in my nature, but the pain of betrayal was forging a new side of me, one that was determined, strategic, and unyieldingly confident. With the evidence mounting, my mind raced through scenarios. I needed a plan that would not only expose Laura and Mark, but also dismantle their plans. I couldn't just confront them. I needed to orchestrate a fall that would leave no room for recovery. First, I decided to learn more about Mark. I used some of my unused vacation days to tail him discreetly. I discovered he was not just my wife's boss, but also married. His wife, Emily, didn't know about the affair either. This piece of information was crucial. I set up a fake social media account to connect with Emily, sharing interests and slowly gaining her trust. It wasn't long before we were having casual conversations about life, including the challenges of marriage. I knew this was risky, but I needed an ally who could help me dismantle this from the inside. Meanwhile, I started sending anonymous tips to Mark's work email about an employee planning to expose company secrets. I made sure these emails seemed to come from different sources, sowing seeds of doubt and paranoia. I even hinted at an upcoming expose in a local business magazine, which I knew would unsettle him. Back home, I began altering the documents for their Thailand trip. I changed the flight dates to a day earlier and switched their hotel bookings to a notorious part of Bangkok known for scams. My aim was to create chaos, confusion, and ultimately, a trip that would be anything but romantic. As the days passed, I could see the strain on Laura. She was on edge, snapping at small inconveniences, probably from the stress of juggling her secret life. I maintained my facade of ignorance, all while my plan unfolded like a dark, silent film. The groundwork was laid, but the execution would require timing and precision. I had to ensure that when everything came to light, there would be no escape for either of them. The morning of their supposed departure to Thailand, I woke up early, the silence of the dawn echoing my own resolve. I had meticulously planned every detail, and today was the day everything would converge. Laura was bustling around, her excitement palpable but tinged with anxiety. She thought today was the start of her escape, but it was, in fact, the beginning of her unraveling. I watched her pack, her movements hurried as if she was racing against time, or perhaps her own conscience. I offered to drive her to the airport, insisting it was the least I could do for her business trip. She accepted, unaware that this would be her last journey with Mark. As we drove, I maintained a calm exterior, engaging in light conversation about nothing in particular. All the while my mind was sharp, focused on the end game. We arrived at the airport with plenty of time, or so she thought. I watched her check her ticket, confusion spreading across her face as she realized the flight was the day before. "What's this, David? These tickets are for yesterday." Her voice was a mix of panic and accusation. "Oh, that's strange," I said, feigning surprise. Maybe there was a mix-up? She started to frantically call Mark, her hands trembling. Meanwhile, I had already alerted Emily, Mark's wife, about the affair. I texted her from my fake account. "Today is the day. Meet us at the airport." Laura's phone rang several times, but there was no answer from Mark. I could see the panic in her eyes, the first cracks in her facade. Minutes later, Emily arrived, her eyes blazing with a mix of betrayal and resolve. She marched straight to us, her presence like a storm cutting through the calm of the airport. Laura's face drained of color as she saw Emily, the reality of her situation setting in. "Laura, Mark," Emily's voice was cold. "I think there's something you need to explain." Laura stammered, looking from Emily to me, her deceit now completely exposed. Mark, finally answering his phone, was on his way, unaware of the scene he was walking into. When he arrived, his face mirrored Laura's shock as he saw his wife standing there, armed with the truth. "This isn't what it looks like." Mark tried to salvage the situation, but his words fell flat. I stepped in then, my voice calm but firm. "I think it's exactly what it looks like, Mark. And you've both been careless with people's lives." The confrontation was swift and public, drawing curious looks from passers-by. I presented the evidence I had collected, emails, photos, everything. The air was thick with tension, and as the reality set in, Laura looked at me with a mix of guilt and fear. I told them, "The trip to Thailand? It's not happening. Your hotel bookings? They're in a part of the city where tourists get scammed daily. Your flights? Already gone. You both played a dangerous game, and now it's checkmate." Mark's professional life was at stake here too. I had leaked enough to his company to start an internal investigation, which I knew would lead to his dismissal. His career, built on lies and manipulation, was crumbling before his eyes. Laura tried to speak, to explain or perhaps apologize, but I held up a hand. "Save it. We're done. I just want you out of my life." Emily, with a dignity that spoke volumes of her pain, simply turned and walked away, leaving Mark to deal with his own wreckage. Laura followed, her steps heavy, her life in disarray. As they left, the weight of betrayal lifted off my shoulders, replaced by a cold, hard satisfaction. I had not only ended this deceit, but ensured their plans would never come to fruition. I walked back to my car, alone but free, feeling the first stirrings of peace since I had discovered the truth. Back home, the house felt different, quieter. I started removing traces of Laura from our shared life, her photos, her belongings, anything that was hers. Each item I placed into boxes felt like reclaiming a piece of my life. The emotional turmoil was immense, but so was my resolve. I knew healing would take time, but for now, I had asserted my dignity, my rights, and my need for justice. The confrontation at the airport was not just about exposing an affair. It was about reclaiming my integrity and standing up for what was right. I spent the rest of the day in solitude, reflecting on the past year, on love lost, and on the path to recovery ahead. The house echoed with the silence of a life once shared, now halved. But in that silence, There was room for new beginnings, for growth, for the man I knew I could become. Not just a victim of betrayal, but a survivor, strong, confident, and ready to face whatever came next. The weeks following the airport confrontation were a blend of silence and chaos within my own mind. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with an emptiness that was almost tangible. I had managed to salvage my dignity, but the emotional wreckage was something I hadn't quite prepared for. I decided to channel my energy into reshaping my life. First on my agenda was to file for divorce. The legal proceedings were straightforward, thanks to the indisputable evidence I had gathered. Yet, each meeting with my lawyer felt like reopening a wound. Laura, on the other hand, seemed to have vanished from my life, her absence both a relief and a reminder of what once was. Occasionally, I would hear from mutual friends that she was struggling, possibly with her job, definitely with her reputation. Part of me felt a pang of sorrow for her, but the stronger part felt vindicated. I threw myself into work, taking on more projects than usual, seeking solace in the monotony of long hours and the satisfaction of achievement. My colleagues noticed the change, some offering support, others just curious about the sudden shift in my demeanor. I kept it all close to the chest, sharing only with my closest friend, Tom, who had been my rock through this ordeal. One evening, Tom and I were having a quiet dinner at a local diner, one of our old haunts. He looked at me, his expression serious. "You did what you had to do, David. But now what? How do you move past this?" I stared into my coffee, the steam swirling up like my thoughts. "I don't know, Tom. I guess one day at a time. I need to find myself again, beyond being just the betrayed husband." Tom nodded, understanding the gravity of my words. "What about revenge? Was it worth it?" I pondered this. The revenge had been satisfying in the moment, a necessary catharsis. But now, in the quiet aftermath, I questioned its merit. It felt right at the time, but now? I'm not sure if it's made me feel any better, just different. The conversation shifted then to lighter topics, but his question lingered. That night, I lay awake, the question echoing in my mind. Had revenge truly been worth it, or had it just been a bandage over a deeper wound? I decided I needed more than just work and solitude to heal. I began to venture out more, joining a hiking group, attending local art shows, anything to reignite a sense of community and personal joy. Each new experience was like a step away from the shadow of my past life. One Saturday, while at an art gallery, I met Sarah, a photographer with a keen eye for capturing the beauty in mundane scenes. Her passion was infectious, and we struck up a conversation about the art of seeing the world anew. There was no romantic intent, just a mutual appreciation for art, and perhaps for the process of healing. Our friendship grew from these shared interests, and she introduced me to her circle, which included yoga classes, book clubs, and more. Through Sarah, I began to see life through a lens of possibilities rather than just through the prism of betrayal. Meanwhile, the professional fallout for Mark was significant. He was dismissed from his job, his reputation in tatters. I heard through the grapevine that he was struggling to find work, his once promising career now a cautionary tale. Emily had moved on, filing for divorce and starting anew, much like I was trying to do. As autumn turned to winter, I started to feel the layers of anger and hurt peeling away. Not all at once, but slowly, like the leaves falling from the trees outside my window. I began to volunteer at a local community center, teaching young adults about financial independence and career planning. Giving back provided a new sense of purpose. One cold evening, while I was preparing a lesson, I received an unexpected email from Laura. It was brief, filled with apologies and regret, asking if we could meet to talk. My initial reaction was to delete it, but something made me pause. Perhaps it was the need for closure or the curiosity about what she could possibly say after all this time. I replied, suggesting we meet in a public place, a coffee shop downtown. The decision was not about reopening old wounds, but about understanding if there could be any semblance of peace from this chapter of my life. As I waited for the day of our meeting, I reflected on my journey. The revenge had been my immediate response to pain, but now, I was trying to build something more substantial from the ruins of my past. I was learning to forgive, not for her, but for me, to free myself from the chains of resentment. The meeting with Laura would be the final piece of this puzzle, a chance to see if I could truly move forward, not just survive, but thrive. With each step, I felt more like the man I had always strived to be, strong, confident, and open to whatever life would bring next. The day of the meeting with Laura arrived with a sky as gray as my feelings about the encounter. I chose a quiet coffee shop on the edge of town, a place where anonymity was almost guaranteed. As I sat there, nursing a black coffee, I watched the door, my heart beating a rhythm of apprehension and resolve. Laura walked in, looking different, her usual poise replaced by a weariness that seemed to age her. She spotted me almost instantly, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and hope. She approached, her steps hesitant, like she was walking into a courtroom rather than a coffee shop. "David," she said, her voice softer, almost fragile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." I nodded, gesturing to the seat opposite me. "Let's hear it, Laura." She sat down, her hands clasping her coffee cup as if it were a lifeline. "I've spent these months reflecting on everything that happened. I owe you an apology, not just for the affair, but for the deceit, the betrayal of our vows." I listened, my face a mask of calm, but inside, a storm of emotions brewed. Words like sorry felt hollow after the depth of betrayal I'd experienced. "And what does this apology mean, Laura? What do you expect from it?" She took a deep breath, her eyes meeting mine with a sincerity I hadn't seen in years. "I don't expect forgiveness, David. I know what I did was unforgivable. I just wanted you to know that I regret it every day. I've lost so much, my job, my friends, my self-respect. I'm in therapy now, trying to understand why I did what I did." I considered her words, the pain of the past year flashing before me. "Therapy is good, Laura, but it doesn't change what happened. You destroyed our life together over an affair." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I know. I've moved out of the city, started over in a small town. I'm working at a nonprofit now, trying to do something good with my life." I felt a twinge of something, pity, perhaps, or just the recognition that she was genuinely trying to rebuild herself. "I appreciate you telling me this, but we can't go back, Laura. We can't undo the past." "I'm not here asking for that," she replied quickly, wiping away a tear. I wanted to see you, to explain, to ask if there's any way we can move forward, not as a couple, but as people who once cared deeply for each other." Her question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of our shared history. I took a moment, sipping my coffee, letting the bitterness remind me of the reality we now faced. "I think we can move forward, but from my end, it's about closure. I've been working on forgiving you, not for you, but for me. I need to let go of this anger to truly move on." Laura seemed to deflate slightly, perhaps expecting more resistance. "I understand. I'm glad you're finding peace, David. You deserve it." The conversation shifted then to the mundane, discussing the changes in our lives, the paths we were now on. It was strange, almost surreal, to talk about the weather, mutual acquaintances, and new hobbies as if we were old friends catching up, not former lovers marked by betrayal. As the meeting drew to a close, I felt a lightness, not from her words, but from the act of facing this chapter head-on. "Take care, Laura. I hope you find what you're looking for." "You too, David," she said, standing up. "Thank you for this. It means more than you know." Watching her leave, I felt a chapter closing, not with a loud bang but with a quiet, definitive whisper. I stayed a bit longer, reflecting on the meeting, on the journey from discovery to this moment of closure. The revenge had been my immediate response, a necessary step to reclaim my dignity. However, this conversation, this closure, was the true healing. It wasn't about her apology. It was about my acceptance of the past and my readiness to define my future. I left the coffee shop feeling lighter, the weight of revenge replaced by the peace of resolution. I knew I was ready to explore life anew, not just surviving but living with intent and joy. Driving back home, I noticed the first snowflakes of the season beginning to fall, each one a symbol of renewal, of new beginnings. I decided then to plan a trip, maybe to the mountains or to a place I'd never been, to celebrate this new phase of my life. The meeting with Laura was not the end of my journey but a significant milestone, proving that even from the ashes of betrayal, one could rise, stronger and more confident, ready to embrace whatever lay ahead. The winter had transformed the landscape around Boston into a serene, white canvas, mirroring the quiet peace settling within me. After the meeting with Laura, I felt a compelling urge to step out of my comfort zone, to embrace the unknown as a symbol of my personal rebirth. I planned a solo trip to the Adirondack Mountains, a place I'd always wanted to visit but never found the time. The idea was to disconnect from the past, to immerse myself in nature, and perhaps find some clarity in the vast, silent wilderness. The day of departure was crisp and clear, the kind of day where the air felt like it was washing away the old to make room for the new. I packed light, just essentials, a camera, and a few books to read by the fire. The drive upstate was long but therapeutic, each mile taking me further from the life I once knew. Upon arrival, the lodge was everything I hoped for, rustic, warm, with large windows that framed the snow-laden trees. My cabin was simple, with a view that promised solitude and introspection. That evening, I sat by the fire, the crackling wood the only sound amidst the profound silence of the forest. The next morning, I ventured out on a hike, the snow crunching under my boots like the breaking of old chains. The physical exertion was a welcome distraction, but it was the solitude that spoke to my soul. I walked for hours, stopping occasionally to take photos or just breathe in the cold, fresh air. At a particular overlook, I paused, the view breathtaking, a sea of white with peaks jutting into a blue sky. Here, I felt small, not in a diminishing way, but in a liberating one. It was as if the vastness of nature reminded me that my problems, while significant, were just a tiny part of this grand universe. I took out my camera and began to capture the moment, not just with lenses, but with my heart. Each picture was a step towards reclaiming joy, towards seeing beauty where I once saw only pain. That evening back at the lodge, I met a few other guests. Among them was an older gentleman named Henry, who had a passion for storytelling. Over dinner, he shared tales of his travels, his losses, and his discoveries. His stories were not of grand adventures, but of simple truths about life, love, and the art of moving on. "You see, David," Henry said, his eyes twinkling with wisdom, "life's like these mountains. There are peaks and there are valleys. You can't have one without the other. What matters is what you see, learn, and take from each part of the journey." His words resonated with me, reinforcing the notion that my journey of healing was not just about leaving behind the past, but about what I would carry forward from it. We talked late into the night, and I felt a kinship with this stranger, a connection through shared human experience. The days melted into one another, each hike offering new insights. One afternoon, I came across a frozen lake, its surface a perfect mirror to the sky. I decided to try ice fishing, something I'd never done before. With the help of a local guide, I spent hours on the ice, the quiet only broken by the occasional sound of the drill or the wind. As I waited for a bite, my mind wandered. I thought about Laura, about Mark, about the life I once had. But unlike before, these thoughts didn't sting. They were just memories, part of my story but not its entirety. The catch was small, a few modest fish, but the experience was monumental. I felt connected to something primal, to the cycles of nature, to the simplicity of life itself. That night, I cooked my catch, feeling a sense of accomplishment not just in the meal, but in my ability to adapt, to learn, to thrive. My last day in the mountains was perhaps the most enlightening. I set out for a sunrise hike, wanting to witness the world waking up from the chill of night. As the first light painted the sky, I stood there, feeling like I was part of something greater, a new day, a new me. Back at the lodge, before I left, I thanked Henry for his stories, which had unknowingly guided me through my own narrative. He smiled. "Remember, David, every end is just a new beginning in disguise." Returning to Boston, I felt different, lighter, ready. I had found peace in solitude, strength in nature, and wisdom in the stories of others. The city looked the same, but I was not. I started integrating this newfound perspective into my daily life. I began to explore new hobbies, made efforts to reconnect with friends, and even considered writing about my experiences, perhaps to help others navigate their own storms. The mountains taught me that life was not about avoiding the valleys, but about appreciating the climb, the view from the top, and the descent that prepares you for the next ascent. And so, with this lesson, I stepped into my new beginning, ready to face whatever was next, with an open heart and a healed spirit. Back in Boston, the city's hustle and contrast with the quiet mountains was stark. Yet, I embraced it with a new vigor. I decided to rearrange my home, shedding items that reminded me of my past with Laura, replacing them with art and decor that spoke to my new self. I started attending more community events, joining a local writing group where I shared my experiences from the Adirondacks. Writing had always been a sideline interest, but now it felt like a calling. My stories, raw and filled with lessons from the mountains, resonated with others in the group, many of whom were also navigating personal upheavals. One evening, after a particularly engaging session where I read a piece about finding peace in solitude, I was approached by a woman named Elise. She was an editor at a local magazine and expressed interest in publishing some of my work. The prospect was exhilarating but also daunting. "David, your perspective is unique," Elise said, her enthusiasm infectious. "It's not just about the betrayal but the journey afterwards. People need to hear this." I agreed to meet with her, and over coffee, we discussed potential articles. This meeting sparked a new phase in my life, writing not just for healing but for sharing, for connecting with others. My first published piece was on resilience and renewal, using the metaphor of mountain climbing to discuss personal growth. Professionally, I also felt the urge to shake things up. I spoke with my boss about exploring a new role within our company that involved more creative strategy, something I'd always been interested in but never pursued. To my surprise, the opportunity was there, and I transitioned into a position that allowed me to blend my analytical skills with creativity. Socially, I began to open up more. I joined a photography club, inspired by my time in nature, and through this, I met people who became good friends. One particular friend, Alex, shared my interest in hiking, and we planned weekend trips, expanding my love for nature into a shared passion. Life was beginning to feel full again, not in the way it was with Laura, but in a new, vibrant way. I was building a life on my terms, one that was reflective of who I had become rather than who I used to be. One chilly evening, as I was reading through feedback on my latest article, I received an unexpected email. It was from Mark, asking if we could meet. My initial reaction was to ignore it, but then I remembered Henry's words about beginnings and endings. We agreed to meet in a park, neutral ground. When I saw Mark, he looked different, less the confident businessman and more a man humbled by life's lessons. He apologized, not just for the affair but for the part he played in my personal crisis. "I've lost a lot, David," Mark said, his voice low. "I've learned from my mistakes. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just for you to know that I understand now." I listened, realizing that forgiveness wasn't about absolving him, but about my own liberation from the past. "I accept your apology, Mark. I've moved on, and I hope you can too." We parted ways, and for the first time, I felt no resentment, just a closure to that chapter. This act of forgiveness was not for Mark but for me, to fully step into my new life without the shadows of past grudges. Months passed, and my life had transformed in ways I couldn't have imagined. My writing took off, leading to invitations to speak at local events about personal growth and resilience. I was becoming known not as the man who was wronged, but as someone who turned adversity into opportunity. One sunny day, while hiking with Alex, we reached a peak that overlooked the city. The view was spectacular, symbolizing my journey, from the depths of betrayal to this new height of self-realization. "You've come a long way, David," Alex said, clapping me on the back. I looked out over the landscape, feeling a profound sense of peace. "We all have our mountains to climb, Alex. It's about choosing to see the view, not just the climb." As we started our descent, I thought about the future. There were no definitive plans, just an openness to possibilities. I was ready for whatever came next, be it love, adventure, or new challenges. The revenge that once seemed necessary was now a distant memory. Instead, I had crafted a life rich with growth, connections, and a deep-seated joy in the journey itself. The story of my life had changed, not because of what happened to me, But because of how I chose to respond, I was no longer the man defined by betrayal, but one defined by resilience, by the love of life, and by the endless horizon of new beginnings.